We all know the reason and the cause for the economic problems that we are now facing, and you know that YouTubers are out there avoiding saying the name in order to avoid the YouTube algorithm from blocking their videos. But the fallout continues as a record number of Americans have filed for their first week of unemployment benefits last week as businesses shut down to slow the spread. Initial jobless claims soared to seasonally adjusted 3.28 million in the week ending March 21st. Now, just to let you know, that is nearly 3 times higher, or over 3 times higher, than the previous record in the history of the United States. This has a lot of long-term serious consequences for the economy, and this is why Congress had passed the $2 trillion bailout package in order to try and ease the problems. Now, that bailout package is going to have a lot of problems of their own. Now, the Democrats are going hog wild using this problem, using this crisis in order to push not only more massive spending, but as an excuse to overthrow democracy and the Constitution and implement tyrannical control over the lives of everybody. And we got to start asking the question, at what point do the Democrats become a much bigger threat than the crisis that had, started all of this? And as we go through, it gets kind of hard because we're going through a situation in which we are trading liberties, freedom, and democracy for a false sense of security over an issue that, based off of modeling and actual results, may have been overblown just a little bit. And we got to start wondering why it may have been overblown. And, intentional versus honest mistake, or just an inherent problem with the modeling. But the Democrats, they're taking full advantage of this because, as Rahm Emanuel always says, never let a crisis go to waste. And even though we already passed $2 trillion, the Democrats say that's not enough. It didn't go far enough. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comes out. What Trump and Senate GOP have done is hold hospital, working people, and the vulnerable hostage so that they could get in $500 billion that will be leveraged into $4 trillion in corporate welfare. Without the Wall Street giveaway, GOP refuses to fund hospitals and unemployment. It's inhumane. To clarify, $1,200 checks are only going to some with Social Security numbers, not immigrants with tax ID numbers. Thanks to GOP, these checks will be cut off the backs of taxpaying immigrants who get nothing. Many are essential workers who pay more taxes than Amazon. Okay, virtually nothing in this tweet is accurate. Maybe that the $500 billion will be leveraged into $4 trillion. That may be the only thing that is true in this tweet. It was the Democrats that were holding everyone hostage in order to try and go through and implement the Green New Deal and, a whole bunch of provisions that had nothing to do with the crisis, completely unrelated to the crisis. They were the ones holding everybody hostage for this. Now, as far as it goes, corporate welfare. No, there is no corporate welfare in this. It's not that businesses, made a bunch of mistakes, were going under, and now expecting to be bailed out of their mistakes. No, the government came in and said, you will close your doors. You will shut down. You will be closed for business during this time. And they have to still try and meet payroll. They have to meet a lot of their other expenses. And at a time when, because of the government, they have no revenue coming in. Of course, we got to compensate for that. And with record numbers of unemployment being filed right now because of the businesses that can't afford to maintain payroll and not go completely under by the time, we're able to reopen, we need to make sure that there are businesses and jobs for people to go back to. And this is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doesn't understand. Or maybe she does, and she purposely wants the economy to fail because it's only in time of complete failure and collapse that socialist tyrants are able to rise up and gain control, making false promises of security and prosperity. When in reality, they're the ones who are usually the cause of the collapse. But in any event, we need to make sure that there are jobs for people to be able to go back to. Now, when it comes to the checks only going to some with social security numbers, not immigrants with tax IDs, okay, now she's going off and trying to conflate things because there are illegal immigrants in the country with tax ID numbers. They've gotten their tax ID numbers from the unconstitutional DACA program, in which, has no legal legitimacy to it, but due to activist judges are allowed to remain in effect. And there are illegal immigrants who got tax identification numbers because they're given temporary ability to work because their asylum and deportation hearings can take, upwards of a year or two, and we're not holding them throughout that time. And the Democrats like to play all these word games and euphemism games. Oh no, not illegal immigrants, they're refugees. That's like saying, no, they're not a shoplifter. They're a, delayed paying customer, right? Where they only pay when they get caught, just like illegal immigrants only claim to be refugees seeking asylum when they get caught. And so this is one of the things where the left is trying to go off and claim to have some sort of moral high ground in order to manipulate emotions, especially while people are panicking, uncertain, and fearful, so that people will just agree to whatever it is they want in exchange for a false sense of security. And even though we already passed $2 trillion, it's not enough for the Democrats. They're wanting to go on and already talk about phase 4, right, of this. Phase 4. And when you go through and take a look at what they're talking about for phase 4, here they're talking about things like, OSHA requirements, changing OSHA requirements. Now they also talk about, food stamps and money for state and local governments. And they were already able to get passed in the $2 trillion a way to get funding to sanctuary cities who have been cut off due to their refusal to enforce U.S. immigration laws. So they're using everything that's going on as an excuse to get around, funding restrictions to sanctuary cities, to fund their, donors and their special interest groups, to go on and try to implement a lot of, policies that would never gain support in any election. And it's always the excuse, it's the pandemic, it's the crisis. What does the crisis have to do with OSHA, right? What does the crisis have to do with trying to make 1/3 of the board elected from, the workers? What does carbon emissions have to do with the current crisis? It doesn't. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form. But they can use this crisis and must pass legislation to deal with the fallout of the policies designed to keep us safe in order to slip in radical socialist changes to our American system. Now, as it was stated, Rahm Emanuel told the party back in 2008, never let a crisis go to waste. And many Democrats are exploiting this crisis to launch a full-bore push for socialism, making the socialist rhetorics of the early Democratic presidential debates look tepid by comparison. For instance, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio has demanded a nationalization of crucial factories and industries that could produce the medical supplies to prepare the country for what we need. Nationalization of industries. Why? Because of our current crisis. What is socialism? The nationalization of industries. Other Democrats across the country are also embracing their inner socialists. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has created state-controlled hand sanitizer factories, and he has threatened to use the power of the state to control prices. It may be a small industry, but it's still textbook socialism. You understand the dangers and the road that the Democrats are trying to push us down. Another common facet of socialist system is the imposition of price controls. Here, too, Democrats are using the current crisis to justify this measure. House Democrat Lloyd Doggett and Jen, whatever. I hate these bad names and everything. And 46 other Democrats members signed a letter calling for price controls on drugs related to treating patients. Okay, yeah. Do you think that after they're able to get away with doing these things, that you're going to be able to put the genie back into the bottle? That you're going to be able to get them to voluntarily give up the power that they have seized? And many on the left are also calling for massive expansions of the welfare state, and that have little or nothing to do with the crisis. This is what socialists left have been demanding for decades. And part of the expansion of the welfare is to get people hooked on government money. To get people hooked on thinking that they can take money and there be no consequences to it. Because once people are hooked on money, it's hard to get them off the government dole, right? And what they're doing here is they're trying to use what's going on to expand the power, authority, and control of the state, to usurp private businesses and nationalize industries, to implement the price controls, all of these socialist policies that have bankrupted and gone to the collapse of countries like Venezuela. They're going through and implementing all of that. Why? Well, because of the crisis. What does it have to do with the crisis? What they're doing? Hardly anything, if at all. And this is where the whole never let a crisis go to waste comes into play, because a crisis is a time when people are not thinking rationally. It's a time when people are panicking, and it's a time when people are demanding that you do something. So anything you do, no matter how unrelated or how horrible, you can get away with being celebrated, and rolling back government has never been done. Right? Once government usurps power to do something, it never relinquishes that power. Now, the Conservative Review has come out and they stated some more terrifying things and what needs to be done about it. States are moving to indefinite lockdowns without presenting any evidence that this is needed. Over and above the severe distancing, it's past time for us to ask questions. Placing Americans indefinitely under a house arrest without any due process, transparency, time limits, guidelines, or checks and balances on a single executive is something that should shake us to our core. Numerous blue cities and county executives are ordering house arrest policies. Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti is threatening to cut off power and water to businesses. If these are the drastic measures they're taking less than 2 weeks into this, one can only imagine where they are headed unless we check their behavior. It's time for patriots to flood their state legislatures with calls and demands that they reconvene and deal with some of the liberty issues, crimes, logistical, and financial issues inherent in this crisis. It's time to return to self-governance, and here's what they recommend. Require that any violation of the Constitution under the guise of stemming an epidemic expire after 7 days, and in order to renew it, there must be some clear findings presented to the legislature and publicize them online, articulating why this is the least restrictive means necessary to achieve the goals. Address the parameters of why some functions are deemed essential and weigh them against the public safety concern. No top-level state official may get paid until the severe lockdown orders are rescinded. Stop the unaccountable release of criminals. Within the home rule parameters of state laws, rein in the edicts of some cities that are taking these measures too far. There must be rigorous debate about the underlying data driving specific strategies and whether they are really prudent. Yes, we need to be questioning everything. The left is very manipulative. They always have been. And when we go through and we see everything that they are doing that has no relation to the crisis that we face, we got to be asking ourselves why, and why has the modeling not matched the actual results? Was the modeling intentionally overinflated? Were the media reports intentionally overflated and overhyped? And you got to start questioning this, especially after all these years, since Trump had won the 2016 elections. They've been talking about he's a dictator. Oh, he's an authoritarian. Oh, he's going to undermine democracy. And now we face a crisis. And what are they demanding? They're demanding that he takes extreme, unprecedented action in order to usurp power and control and consolidate it within the executive. Why? Because they are wanting him to set a precedent that they can then exploit later on down the road when a Democrat is into office. They want to be able to go through and say it's not that much more of a stretch to go from what Trump did to a Democrat issuing martial law the next time there's an outbreak. And therefore, during martial law, they can suspend all constitutional rights, which then they can say, now you forfeit your Second Amendment rights, you have to turn over all your guns, and then there is definitely no going back. The Democrats, they don't care about what's actually going on. They don't care about your life. All they care about is how they can manipulate this to consolidate power and control, how they can overthrow, capitalism and the wealth that it produces and individual liberty, and make it so that only they at the top who get to dictate every aspect of your life to you are the only ones who are going to prosper. Why do you think it's only the leaders of socialism who are rich and the followers of socialism who are dirt poor and starving in the streets? It's no surprise. And while we've always known that Democrats are egregiously power hungry, lying, sniveling, I'm not going to say it at all, but as we've always known that they are basically disgusting people with disgusting ideas. The idea that they've been able to go this far, this fast is really scary. And it is something that we all need to be taken aback by going, okay, before this goes any further, what's the actual risk of the crisis we face versus the risk and the fallout of the economic collapse versus the threat that we are now facing by the Democrats' power grab during this time? Because right now, I'm beginning to think that the crisis that started all of this is the least of our worries in this country, and that the economic crisis, while important, is not as big of a threat as the Democrats.